Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookworm here. Today I'd like to bring you an article called Posing for Muscular Display, written by Fred Massaro, a very well-known bodybuilder from the Silver Era, known for his incredible posing ability. I believe this article is a very good guide to the classical style of Silver Era posing, and is probably one of the best posing articles I've ever read. Now, the article basically focuses on posing to your strengths, and I really do believe that it also focuses on bringing back the artistic expression of posing in bodybuilding. Now, Fred Massaro asks a very important question to the reader, which I'll now read. What are the secrets which make one man an impressive poser, one who thrills the audience, while another may present a posing routine which creates no emotion and falls static and dead? Are large muscles and a perfect physical development the full answers? And of course the answer is no. One needs artistic expression, and that is what this article is all about. What a perfect way of presenting this with this fantastic photo of the icon Steve Reeves. He's actually, you can see his face is relaxed, and he's very artistic in the way he presents his physique. He is not grimacing in the face, he's very relaxed, yet his muscles seem full and well developed. And it is because he has practiced his posing. His posing is so perfect, he's practiced it so many times that he only needs to contract a certain amount, not completely. If you've actually read Building a Classic Physique, Steve talks about not having to over tense when he posed, and that his physique just bloomed on stage, and this happens through hours and hours of posing, and through basically being able to, once you have mastered the posing, to present yourself artistically and tell a story. What a beautiful pose of Steve Reeves, beautifully presenting his physique in the most artistic fashion. That's what classical Silver Era posing was all about. Let's get straight to the article. Now, Fred Massaro starts off the article talking about himself, how he didn't have the skeletal framework or the height of men such as Clancy Ross or Alan Steffen. He more had an Apollo-like physique. If you remember my previous video on Silver Era physiques and how to categorize them using Greek sculptor forms, which I'll link up right now, he knew that his physique was more slender and more athletic, and therefore he could never build the muscular bulk of a man like John Grimmett, shown here. He could never have a 48 to 50 inch chest or 18 inch plus arms at all. He just couldn't. His framework would never support it. Therefore, he decided to perfect his physical proportions by putting on as much bulk as he could for his own framework, and then define the physique. And after that, of course, learn posing from studying photos of bodybuilders that had a similar framework than he did. He understood his genetics. That was the message that he was trying to put forth. If you have a small frame, work with it, and don't, try and be someone you can't be. This is a very, very important message brought forth by Fred Massaro. Now, Fred Massaro was very intelligent in the poses that he chose. I mean, he looked through some magazines such as Your Physique and Muscle Power, and basically attempted to duplicate the poses which he thought would be fitting to his physique. One could almost call this custom posing, and it should be, because if posing is going to be an artistic expression of yourself, it needs to be custom made to you. You can't pretend that you're going to be someone else. You have to show your physique, who you are, right? And so he basically started studying poses that would suit his own framework. And he realized that because he could not present a huge muscular body, instead he focused on the artistic expression and the graceful positions of certain poses. These poses were more suited to him because they were not necessarily suited for more bulkier physiques. So he chose these graceful and artistic poses. He would study and practice these poses, especially of successful bodybuilders who closely resembled his own development, and this makes wonderful sense. So he basically thought, well, I'm an Apollon style bodybuilder, therefore I need to study Apollo-like physiques such as, for example, Tony Sansoni and Georges Boulanger. These are physiques that are all Apollo-like, and therefore, according to his physique, he can study these photos and emulate what these wonderful Silver Era bodybuilders have done before him. A very intelligent approach to posing. Now, Fred Massaro, as I mentioned earlier, was a Silver Era bodybuilder who was very well known for his posing. He understood his framework, and actually, very similar to Ed Corney in the Golden Era, just decided to master posing. And he basically perfected it by looking at the whole physique, and he learned one very important point, and this is the very important point that I'm going to make now, and that is that posing always works from the legs up. The placement of the legs is very, very important. When incorrectly placed, that is the legs, the pose begins to look awkward and unimpressive. Therefore, his recommendation is to set the legs perfectly first. For example, if you're going to sit down, if you're going to stand and do poses that way, the legs need to be perfectly placed. What a fantastic example here in the first page of this article, as I mentioned, posing for muscular display. Here is Fred Massaro doing a pose. It's not exactly seated, it's not exactly standing, it's kind of reclining on this stool with a cloth over it. But more important is his leg placement. Just look at his leg placement. One leg, the front leg, is beautifully stretched out. Although it's stretched out, his leg is not relaxing. You can see that he's flexing his calf. The other one, he's also flexing his calf, yet bending it at the knee. And then everything else above flows. You can see that he's set the legs perfectly first, and then everything else flows. He's holding a vacuum. Although he's just doing some kind of a thinker's pose there, you can see that he's flexing his bent arm. And the straight arm, although it is extended behind him, it is not relaxed. He's flexing the tricep and the forearm. The chest is not overly tense, and you can see that the expression of his face is one of a thinker. He is actually feeling and the pose and conveying a message using the pose. And these are points that we're going to talk about later. A beautiful pose, and you can see how Fred Massaro practiced what he preached, that is to perfect the pose. Now, Fred Massaro mentions that one of the best ways to learn to pose is to actually enter a contest. Basically, when you have a good enough physique and you have your posing routine, pretty well remembered, and it flows very well, you're basically ready for a contest. And he also mentions that you shouldn't have that high expectations in your first contest. Mistakes will be made. For example, he mentions how he was nervous and he pumped up too much, for example, and therefore he was fatigued and could not control his poses. Later, he started studying art and doing other things to perfect his posing, which we'll talk about as well. But mainly he talks about basically getting out there, getting into contests, learning from your mistakes, and learning from the experience. Very, very wise advice from Fred Massaro. So Fred Massaro then decided to take his posing to the next level. He understood, as I said earlier, that he didn't have a massive physique. He didn't have a huge chest and huge arms. He had a small frame to work with. So he really took his posing to another level, and he decided to start visiting museums and studying works of art. He would study classical painting, sculpture, etc., and learn the appreciation of art and bodily display. And this is a very, very intelligent way of learning posing, because you learn the expression of art seen through other artists. And if bodybuilding is an art, therefore why not learn art itself, classical art? I think this is a very, very intelligent and wise form of learning how to pose in other ways, and expressing yourself in other forms. If you only study bodybuilding and bodybuilding alone and posing from bodybuilding, you won't really broaden your posing ability. But by studying other forms of art, that's a really, really intelligent way, and you basically open up yourself to other possibilities in posing. A very intelligent form of thinking of Fred Massaro. So Fred Massaro mentions that after having studied classical art, he perfected his posing. He perfected it and basically posed for hours and hours, and started entering more contests and then he began to win posing awards. He then started really focusing on the fine points of his posing, gliding, for example, from one pose to the other with no awkward transitions shown before the audience. I mean, this is so important, the awkward transitions, the mentioning of this, because it is so applicable nowadays. We see in bodybuilding contests how people just relax between poses and their guts just spill out. It's disgusting. And I think Fred Massaro's message is very important here. When you are in front of the crowd, you are presenting yourself and everything should be perfect. You shouldn't have awkward transitions. There should be no gut hanging out. I mean, this is something that modern bodybuilding should really grasp, that every moment you are up on stage, you should be perfectly presenting yourself. Very intelligent. And so he mentions that this perfect presentation was perfected through hours and hours of posing until he knew each pose and every turn to the smallest detail. He learned each pose should lead up to the next and flow, and that as you got into the pose, no further tension or flexion should take place that isn't necessary. From each pose, he would gracefully and smoothly move to the next pose instead of just relaxing everything in between. As he puts it, there should never be a letdown between poses. No awkward transitions at all. No lessening of muscular appearance at all times in front of the audience. That is what makes a perfect poser. Beautiful advice from a classic silver era legend of posing, a master of posing, Fred Massaro. Now, one very important thing that Fred Massaro also talks about, I mean, his poses almost possessed him. It's incredible to read this article. Fred actually began naming his poses. For example, the discus thrower, the thinker, David, as I showed previously as a sculpture, David's Michelangelo. I mean, look at this wonderful pose of Steve Reeves. I've shown this photo several times in my videos, and it's just beautiful. This pose is called sword overhead. It's almost a victorious pose, like, you know, imagine Steve Reeves being Hercules, having slayed an entire army, and he holds his sword overhead triumphantly with the sun beaming at his glorious physique. That's what this pose tells me. It tells me a story, and that's basically why Fred Massaro named his poses. Let me read on. He basically says, by naming your pose in this way, you feel each pose, and you try and convey a message with feeling, and you're basically telling a story. And he focused on artistic expression using the name of the pose, the feeling of the pose, and in that way he became at ease on the platform. I mean, this is the artistic expression that is missing in today's bodybuilding. Beautiful advice from Fred Massaro. Wonderful. Further on, as almost one could guess that he could have almost been critiquing modern bodybuilding. I read on. Forced poses or tensing was out, because over tensing or too much tension and flexion basically prevents the natural art of the pose. It prevents artistic expression. It's so obvious in this photo. I mean, we look at these bodybuilders from nowadays and they just look like, I'm sorry, but they're like taking a shit in the toilet. I mean, there is no art. It is all about, I've got more muscle than this guy. I'm more ripped than this guy. Where is the art? Where is the artistic expression? Where is the beauty? There isn't. It is not an art form anymore. It is a freak show. Anyway, that's my own opinion. Let's read on. Prior to posing display, Fred says, a mild pump-up workout should be performed about 2 hours before, and then just before coming on stage, a quick 20 push-ups could be done just to pump yourself up a little bit more. If you pump up too much, as he says, you'll be tired and fatigued. And if you don't have enough sleep, if you're just fatigued, it will show in your posing. Because your face, you can tell when a person is stressed. You look at them and your friend or whatever, and you say, mate, what's up? What's up? You know something's up because you're tired or you're pissed off or whatever. Humans are expressive beings. They show their feelings. even though they're trying to hide it maybe, and if they try and hide it, they'll be too tense. And this what a wonderful example in bodybuilding. You can clearly tell when a person's not right. They are completely displaying their whole physique. They're almost naked in front of you. So everything's going to show, especially if you're fatigued. Again, wonderful advice from Fred Massaro. He mentions that the week before your competition, you should practice your posing and mainly train very light. Focus on your shoulders, training your shoulders, chest and back, basically the showy muscles, the abdominals. Not training the legs too much because they are half of your body and they will fatigue you. Instead, get lots of rest, sleep and relax. Wonderful advice again from the wonderful poser of the silver era, Fred Massaro. Fred's final advice in this article is to basically, in summary, develop your physique perfectly, as perfect as you can, and then learn to display it. Learn to show it to the very best of your advantage. This is the mark of a true champion. Again, I leave you with this great photo of Steve Reeves. Beautiful. You can see he is the perfect physique, especially in the silver era. The muscles are full. The physique is perfect. And even better, the display is perfect. His posing was perfect. You can see it all. Artistic expression. Messages being conveyed with each and every single pose. Steve Reeves was an icon of bodybuilding, not just because he had a perfect physique, but because his posing was perfect as well. It was artistic, graceful, and beautiful. Hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't to the Golden Era Bookworm. Leave me a comment, and thank you for watching. What do you think? Should these advices be passed on to modern bodybuilding? I definitely think so. I think that artistic expression is missing and it should be brought back. The graceful posing of bodybuilding should come back because bodybuilding, after all, is an art. This is the Golden Era Bookworm. Bye for now.
Hi everybody, I just want to recommend this phenomenal book, Vince's Secret Locker, volume number 2 by Carl Coyne. I've been looking at this for about 4 weeks and I can't put it down. If you get a chance, check it out. He also has a part 1 that I highly recommend also. Vince was the trainer of the stars and had an amazing, interesting gym that today there's still not equipment like it around. It was all made out of wood. He'll be on our radio show coming up probably in the next couple weeks or so. Have a great day, and again, highly recommend this book.